Well, thank you, Mr. Blind. My name is Rob Kreitlein, and I am an attorney since graduating law school in 2000. I did my undergrad work at the American University in Washington, D.C., and graduated law school from the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. I practiced for a number of years doing trial work, doing some criminal defense, a lot of guardian ad litem work, worked in family court. I have worked a lot with in education, just kind of handling cases with students and dealing with criminal issues as well as truancy and things related to family court. I also served, I've taught as a adjunct professor in criminal justice and criminology and business law for a few years. And I am probably best known around these parts for being the lesser half of the most beautiful and talented fourth grade teacher in the world, Megan Kreitlein. She has been teaching at Eden Elementary for 19 years. We actually met in 2012, and fun little fact, we actually got married at Eden Elementary. So that's my wife's, one of her happy places, I think. We've had 5 kids in the system. 2 have graduated. Our youngest is currently going into 4th grade next year, and we also now have 2 grandkids that are the youngest one's entering the system this year. So,
please describe your role as a local school board member as you understand. Why are you the best person to fill this position?
Well, a school board is the governing body for a school system or district. The board member, I guess, individually doesn't really have any special power separate and apart from the board. It's only when they're sitting with that body that they have a oversight and advisory and leadership role, with the system. With that said, though, I do believe that a school board member individually should be a advocate for the system and for the students and for the parents and for the schools, the faculty and the teachers. I believe they should be a presence. As a matter of fact, I've already warned my wife, if I get put on the board, I will be spending a lot of time going to open houses and, art nights and all of the things. I would make it a personal goal to visit every school and talk to every principal and administrator and as many teachers as I could in that, first 6 months, while we're being educated and kind of oriented to the job. Because I think, it's important to be visible and, in the schools, in the community as well. I believe that I'm an appropriate candidate for the position just because of my education and experience. I have the perspective of having taught. I have the perspective of, being involved in legal issues around schools and disabilities and, the various aspects of law and education. And then, having had 5 kids go through the system and just participating with their education and, visiting schools. And, I helped when my daughter was in high school here with the debate team and came and did some exercises and some drills with them just to kind of impart some trial experience with them. And I was involved, with pretty much all of my kids' activities and stuff. And so, during that time, you talk to teachers, you talk to other parents, you talk to other students. And so, I talk to my wife all the time and, just kind of lend an ear to her. And so I've talked to all of her friends. And so I feel like I have a good nexus of information and insight into what's involved with the different aspects of education and school operation and teaching and also being a parent, you know, and just kind of dealing with all of the stuff that parents deal with their kids in school. And so, you know, outside of that, I, you know, have really developed a passion for education. When I taught, I really kind of found out that, you know, hey, being a trial lawyer wasn't necessarily my calling. I loved to teach, and I absolutely love being involved with my kids' education. And, you know, it's something that I'm passionate about and that I really feel strongly that, you know, there are things that need to be addressed in the school system, and there's things that need to be addressed in society. And I think that, you know, one of the things my wife has taught me is, you know, she has an unwavering belief in her ability to have an impact on her little corner of the world. And, you know, I think I came into our marriage a little bit of a cynic. Having, you know, done murder trials and rape trials. And when I was in college, I worked for a psychiatrist doing interviews for criminal defendants who had done terrible things. I worked as a security contractor in the former Yugoslavia during war crimes investigations. And so I was a hard-boiled cynic in 2012 when I met her, but we can't go anywhere in this town, we can't go anywhere in East Alabama without her getting jump hugs from random kids of all ages that she's taught and just had this impact on. And I've seen that, and, you know, I guess this is sort of my way of wanting to, you know, jump in on that a little bit. And I do have to confess, because the city council and the mayor's here, that I wasn't really, you know, on board with this whole idea right at the start. And so I think that kind of leads me into what I also think makes me an appropriate candidate, is I'm very open-minded. And I went to a community forum. I engaged with Mayor Pruitt. I engaged with Mr. Alverson and Mr. Mitchum and some of the counselors. And they convinced me, you know, and might have done a little bit too good of a job, because not only did I vote for this, now I've applied and I'm sitting up here. So, but that's why I feel like I'm a good candidate.
What are the most significant issues for our school district currently facing? How would you propose the district address these challenges?
I would have to say, I think first and foremost, funding is a big issue. And, you know, when I say that, I am aware that, you know, we are reliant on outside entities for that funding. But in my current role, I serve as a director of operations and compliance for a law firm in Birmingham. And so one of my jobs is efficiency and compliance with client requirements. I like to joke around the office that I was doing Doge 10 years ago, long before this. And so, you know, Pell City generally spends around $10,000 per pupil, if you look at their funding, at the gross revenue. And the school finance indicators database, it's going to become apparent as I talk, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit of a data nerd. And so I love spreadsheets. I love looking things up. I feel like there's a lot you can glean from data. And so the school finance indicators database has found that, you know, they have come up with an adequacy formula for every school district as far as what they feel like is adequate funding. And right now, Pell City is about 12% below what that adequate funding is. And so, you know, sort of recognizing that, you know, funding is maybe limited, and, you know, there's only so much control we can maybe have over that. I think if I was put on the board, I would love to look at some ideas for getting additional funding from different places. I think this might be one of those kind of out of the box things where somebody has, some crazy ideas that would actually work. But I think one big thing would be, one thing I do in my job every day is figure out, okay, if this is the amount of money we have, how can we stretch that? What are ways that maybe we're being inefficient with our current spending? And can we allocate more money to things that give us more impact? Because sometimes you can spend money on things that are good, but you could spend it better. And so, there's ways that, you can impact things in a very positive way. And so I think that's probably, to me, job number one, would just be that funding issue. I think recruitment, retention, and morale for teachers, obviously being the husband of a teacher, that's going to be near and dear to my heart. And, with the teacher shortage nationally, I think everybody's probably familiar with the statistics that 50% of new teachers are out of the profession in 3 years. And we're not even graduating enough. And then on top of that, we've got half of the force leaving, within 3 years. And that doesn't even take into account that maybe there are some people that are trying to make a go of it, but it's just the wrong profession for them and they're not right. And, hard choices need to be made to let them go. And so I think that's one problem. It's difficult to let somebody that's maybe not the best at what they do go because there's a shortage and, you don't know what you're going to get. I think, there's a lot of things, outside of just paying a higher salary, that could be done that, we could allocate more vacation days and sick days. I think that's a huge deal for teacher mental health. I think there's probably something I saw in my law practice that concerned me 20 years ago, and I feel like it's only gotten worse, is sort of the overly aggressive mainstreaming of behavior problems into regular classrooms. I know that ADA is involved in that. I dealt with that. But I do feel like as an attorney that there are times where schools are bending over backwards unnecessarily to avoid a lawsuit. And, in the meantime, they're really stressing teachers out by putting problem behaviors in their classrooms, and they're depriving other kids of an educational opportunity because they have to deal with those distractions and with that violence often that they have to deal with. And so I don't necessarily know what the solution is to that. I hate to present a problem without necessarily know, but I think that's something that I would love to delve into, and I would love to have a discussion. Pell City has a bunch of great lawyers, and I think sometimes it's not a good idea to just run from lawsuits because you just invite more leverage on the other side. Sometimes you have to make a stand and say, no, we're not going to do this. And if you have to go to trial, then go to trial and deal with it. Lastly, school safety is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I studied school violence and mass shootings, and I've worked with other academics and a lot of law enforcement agencies on, appropriate measures to deal with it. I know it's a low probability. They don't happen very often, but when they do, they're high impact. And so having been in the schools and having just been around and talking to my kids, I see issues in the system, and I would love to address that, whether I get on the board or not. That's definitely a conversation that I want to have. But those are the things that I feel like I see.
The Alabama State Department of Education scored Pell City schools an 80 in 2022, an 81 in 2023, and an 83 in 2024. What are your thoughts on this trend and the trajectory of the school system overall?
Yeah, so at first glance, you want to look at that and say that's a great trend. As a kind of a data nerd, I'm always on guard for when are you picking to start your trend. And so, for instance, if we, obviously the 2 years bracketing the pandemic, they didn't score. But if you go back to 2019, so the first, or I guess the last year that they did scores before the pandemic, Pell City was an 86. And so, that's not a good trend if you go back and you consider where we were. Obviously, the pandemic had a lot to do with that. And I think there's abundant studies out there at how damaging the lockdowns were, keeping kids out of school. And so I know these numbers are important, and I definitely think that, that's something we need to, look at and improve on. But I also think, we have to take into account that, those numbers were impacted by an event that nobody had any control over, and now we've got to deal with it. And those kids that were involved in the lockdowns, the youngest of them are going to be in school through like 2034. And so they're all playing catch up. Every year, teachers, administrators, and the students themselves are having to play catch up from that. And so I think those numbers, it's great to see them going back up. I fear that maybe that's a little bit of an artificial sort of bump, that, it had to go back up because it was so low because of the pandemic. But I definitely think that there's ways to address those numbers, just looking at what goes into them. It's not just test scores, it's attendance. There's other factors involved. And so I think that there's a holistic approach there that could make that a lot better, and maybe even quickly.
Do we have any follow-up interviews from any of the commission members?
Yeah, I do. We've learned a lot, heard a lot this week about absenteeism in our school system. And I think it's hurting our schools. I heard you mention truancy. Never heard that word this week, but you've got to give us legal, just tell us, give us your thoughts on this. How can a board member help us with that chronic absence?
Yeah, well, I think it is important to note that, board members don't, or the board itself don't recommend things. That has to come from the superintendent. But I do think the board should, work collaboratively with the system to get those recommendations in place. One thing I will note, that you have to take into account when you're dealing with this issue. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the Pareto principle. Some people call it the power law or Price's law. And basically, it's just a mathematical system that says 80% of your outputs are going to be caused by about 20% of your inputs. And so what that basically means is that I haven't even seen the numbers, but I can know intuitively that 80% of the absences are going to be caused by about 20% of the kids. And they're probably disadvantaged economically. They're probably coming from bad home situations. It might even be not always their choice that they're not coming to school. And so I think there needs to be sort of a social work, component to this that's not just geared around throwing parties or punishing them with, extracurriculars that a lot of those kids probably aren't even doing. So, you're not necessarily hitting that core group that's a problem. And so that would be my observation, that there's probably some big impact that could be made by hitting that core group.
Robert, thank you so much for your time and dedication to the Tennessee schools. This concludes your meeting.
Thank you.